The world was stunned when news broke about the heartbreaking tragedy surrounding Diane Keaton, Hollywood's timeless icon whose wit, grace, and eccentric charm have captivated audiences for over 5 decades. Known for her unforgettable roles in Annie Hall, The Godfather, and Something's Gotta Give, Keaton has always lived her life with honesty and humor, even in the face of heartbreak. But after her funeral, it was her daughter who stepped forward to reveal the truth. And what she shared left fans around the world in tears. Throughout her life, Diane Keaton kept her private world closely guarded. Behind the laughter, the hats, and the carefully crafted Hollywood image was a woman who endured quiet pain, loss, loneliness, and deep regret that she rarely spoke about publicly. Her family, especially her 2 adopted children, were her sanctuary, her reason to keep going when fame felt empty. But what her daughter revealed after the funeral painted a picture few ever saw. It wasn't about wealth or legacy. It was about the emotional battles that even the brightest stars can't escape. The truth about Diane Keaton's final days, her struggles with aging, isolation, and a deep sadness she hid behind her radiant smile, shocked those who believed she had it all. As the details came to light, the world began to understand that behind the legend was a fragile heart, one that had given so much to her art, her family, and her fans, yet still carried unbearable pain. This is the untold story of Diane Keaton's private heartbreak, her lasting love for her children, and the revelation her daughter made that changed everything. To the world, Diane Keaton was the very picture of confidence, quirky, funny, unapologetically herself. Whether playing Annie Hall, Kay Corleone, or Erica Barry, she brought a rare blend of humor and vulnerability to every role. Yet behind that smile, there was a private pain few ever saw. In interviews, Diane often joked about her single life, her love of hats, or her eccentric habits. But those close to her knew that beneath her charm was a woman who carried the weight of loneliness. She had loved deeply, famously dating Al Pacino, Warren Beatty, and Woody Allen, yet never found a lasting partner. "I was afraid of losing myself," she once said, "so I stayed alone." Her decision to adopt 2 children later in life was her greatest joy. Becoming a mother to Dexter and Duke Keaton gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. She once told a reporter, "They saved me from myself." But even motherhood couldn't fully shield her from the quiet ache of time passing. As the years went by, she began withdrawing more from the spotlight, focusing on her family and private life. Those close to her noticed subtle changes, moments of forgetfulness, fatigue, and emotional detachment. Friends described her as nostalgic, often reflecting on the people she'd lost, including her parents. Diane's close bond with her mother, Dorothy Keaton Hall, shaped her entire worldview. When Dorothy passed away, Diane found herself confronting her own mortality in ways she hadn't before. She would sit quietly in the garden for hours, a friend recalled. Sometimes she'd laugh to herself, and sometimes she'd just stare at the trees. Despite her fame, Diane struggled with feeling misunderstood. Hollywood adored her for her eccentricity, but few saw the woman behind it, someone who had given everything to her craft, only to feel increasingly isolated as she aged. Her daughter, Dexter, later revealed that her mother often spoke about the burden of fame. "She loved acting, but she hated what it did to her heart," Dexter shared softly. "She said that being known by everyone sometimes means being truly known by no one." In her later years, Diane became a quiet observer of her own life, reflective, tender, and at times sorrowful. She would reread her mother's journals, revisit old photos, and write letters she never sent. Though she smiled for the cameras, those closest to her sensed a growing melancholy, one that no amount of applause could cure. Behind the laughter, there was a deep and haunting truth. Even legends grow tired of pretending to be invincible. As Diane Keaton's radiant smile slowly began to fade from the public eye, those who loved her most noticed the quiet signs that something wasn't right. She had always been vibrant, witty, and full of life, but in her final months, that spark began to dim. Her daughter, Dexter, who had always shared a close bond with her mother, was the first to sense the change. She wasn't herself anymore, Dexter later said softly. Mom used to call every morning just to talk about nothing. Then one day the calls stopped. Diane had begun experiencing bouts of confusion and exhaustion. Once so quick-witted, she would sometimes lose her train of thought mid-conversation. At first, her family chalked it up to age or stress, but it soon became clear that something deeper was wrong. Friends described her as drifting away. She would sit for hours in her favorite chair, staring out at her garden, the same garden she used to tend with so much joy. She'd hum to herself, talk about her old movies, then suddenly fall silent, said one longtime friend. It was as if she was walking through memories only she could see. Despite her struggles, Diane tried to keep her humor alive. Even as her health declined, she'd joke about it in the way only she could. "Well," she once said, "I guess I'm auditioning for the next life. I just hope they don't make me wear beige." Her daughter took on the role of caretaker, doing everything she could to make her mother comfortable. Dexter described those days as both heartbreaking and sacred. "I knew she was fading, but I also knew she was at peace," she said. "We talked a lot about love, about life, about how she wanted to be remembered." In one of their last conversations, Diane told her, "Don't let the sadness win. Remember the laughter. That's where I'll be." As the days passed, her energy waned. Her laughter, once the soundtrack of her home, grew softer. The woman who had once lit up screens around the world now found solace in silence. Surrounded by her children, a few close friends, and her treasured photographs, Diane's final moments were filled with love. Not the dazzling kind she'd known on screen, but a quiet, tender kind that only family can give. When the news of her passing broke, the world was stunned. Hollywood mourned the loss of one of its brightest lights, but it was her children who carried the deepest grief. At the funeral, there were no grand speeches, no dramatic farewells, just a simple service filled with music, flowers, and memories. A soft rendition of "You Made Me Love You" played in the background, one of her favorites. Dexter later revealed through tears that her mother had planned much of the ceremony herself. She didn't want a show, Dexter said. She wanted it to feel like home. As the guests gathered to say goodbye, Al Pacino, Diane's longtime friend and one-time great love, stood quietly in the back, his eyes filled with sorrow. They had shared a complicated relationship, one marked by passion, distance, and unspoken affection. After the service, he approached Dexter and whispered, "Your mother was one of the purest souls I ever knew." In the days following the funeral, Dexter finally spoke publicly about her mother's final chapter. Through her words, the world began to understand the depth of Diane's private pain and her quiet grace in facing it. "Mom didn't want people to feel sorry for her," she said. "She wanted them to remember her as someone who lived, really lived, and loved, until the end." Though Diane Keaton's passing left a hole in the hearts of many, her legacy endures, not just through her films, but through the laughter, warmth, and wisdom she left behind. She once wrote in her journal, "Life isn't about being remembered by everyone. It's about being loved by someone." And in that sense, Diane Keaton never truly left at all. In the weeks following Diane Keaton's funeral, Hollywood was awash in tributes. Directors, co-stars, and fans all shared their memories of the woman who had defined charm, wit, and heart for generations. But one man's silence spoke louder than any of their words: Al Pacino. For decades, Diane and Al had been one of Hollywood's most enigmatic pairs. Their on-screen chemistry in The Godfather wasn't just acting. It was a reflection of something real, something tender that had blossomed quietly behind the cameras. They had fallen for each other during the filming of The Godfather Part 2, and although their relationship was never conventional, it was deep and enduring. "We drove each other crazy," Diane once said with a laugh, "but we also made each other feel alive." After Diane's passing, Al finally broke his silence in an emotional interview that left fans stunned. Sitting in a quiet corner of his Beverly Hills home, his voice trembled as he spoke her name. Diane was... She was light. She was laughter. You never really understood her. You just felt her. For years, Al and Diane's romance had been a subject of fascination. Though they never married, their connection ran far deeper than most realized. "She was the love I could never quite hold on to," Al admitted softly. "But she's also the love I never stopped carrying with me." Their relationship was as complicated as it was passionate. They were two brilliant, intense souls, both fiercely independent, both devoted to their craft. "We fought a lot," Al recalled, smiling sadly. "But every fight ended in laughter. She could disarm me with one look." He paused, eyes glistening. "You know, there's a scene in The Godfather Part 3 where I kiss her hand. That wasn't acting. That was me saying goodbye before I ever had to." It wasn't until Diane's later years that the two reconnected in a meaningful way. Though they had both gone their separate paths, Diane becoming a beloved mother and acclaimed director, Al focusing on his storied career, they often spoke late into the night. "She'd call me at 2 a.m., Al said. "Just to talk about life, about growing old, about love. She'd say, 'Can you believe we're still here, Al?' When Diane's health began to fail, Al was one of the first to visit her quietly. She didn't want pity, he said. She just wanted company, to laugh, to remember. In her final weeks, Al sat with her often. They'd watch old movies, sometimes their own, sometimes others. She'd point at the screen and say, 'Look at those kids. They didn't know a damn thing, did they?' He recalled, smiling through tears. After her death, Al struggled to find the right words. 'How do you talk about someone who changed your life?' He said softly. 'She taught me how to feel, how to love without fear.' In his final tribute, Al admitted something he had never said publicly before. 'I was in love with Diane Keaton until the very end. Maybe I still am.' Those who knew them best said Al's grief was profound, not just for the woman he'd lost, but for the time they'd never gotten back. 'They were soulmates in the truest sense,' said one close friend. Even when they weren't together, they were never really apart. Diane once wrote in her journal, 'Love isn't about forever. It's about the moments that never fade.' For Al Pacino, those moments will remain forever. When the lights dimmed on Diane Keaton's extraordinary life, the world didn't just lose a Hollywood icon, it lost one of its most authentic souls. Her passing left a silence that echoed through generations of artists, dreamers, and fans who had found comfort in her honesty, humor, and unshakable individuality. In an industry obsessed with perfection, Diane stood proudly imperfect. She never hid behind an image, never pretended to be anyone but herself. Her signature style, the tailored suits, the oversized hats, the confident grin, wasn't about fashion. It was about freedom. "Clothes are armor," she once said. "They help me face the world." And face it she did, boldly, playfully, and on her own terms. From her unforgettable roles in Annie Hall, Something's Gotta Give and The First Wives Club, to her touching performances in Reds and Marvin's Room, Diane redefined what it meant to be a woman in Hollywood. She showed that strength could coexist with vulnerability. That beauty wasn't about age, and that love, in all its messy, complicated glory, was worth chasing no matter the outcome. Her influence stretched beyond the screen. She was a photographer, a writer, an advocate for preservation, and above all, a devoted mother. Her children, Dexter and Duke, have carried on her warmth and creativity, continuing the quiet legacy she built at home. One filled with laughter, late-night talks, and unconditional love. After her funeral, friends and family gathered at her Los Angeles home, surrounded by the things she loved most, books, family photos, and sunlight pouring through the garden windows. Dexter spoke softly to the guests, holding back tears. "Mom wasn't afraid of dying," she said. "She was afraid of not living enough. And I think she lived beautifully." Hollywood honored her memory with a rare tribute, a montage of her greatest moments played at the Oscars, ending with one of her favorite quotes. "You've got to keep moving forward. The world doesn't stop for anyone." But those who knew Diane personally say her real legacy wasn't captured in film reels. It lived in how she made people feel. She listened deeply, cared immensely, and loved without expectation. Her friends recall that she sent handwritten notes to nearly everyone she worked with, often with simple messages like, "You make the world brighter." Her daughter later revealed that Diane left behind a letter to her children, one final message written in her familiar looping handwriting. In it, she wrote, "Don't waste a second hiding who you are. Wear what you love. Laugh too loud. Take pictures of everything. And when life breaks your heart, remember, that means you were brave enough to care." That letter has since been framed in Dexter's home, a daily reminder of the woman who taught the world that vulnerability is not weakness, but art. As the curtain finally closed on Diane Keaton's life, she left behind more than movies and memories. She left behind a challenge to live truthfully, love fiercely, and never apologize for being different. And perhaps that's exactly how Diane Keaton would want to be remembered. Not as a tragedy, but as a brilliant, fearless soul who turned the absurdity of life into something unforgettable.